Page 1. Evolution, Bergstrom and Dugatkin, 2012. Chapter 1. An Overview of Evolutionary Biology. A brief introduction to evolution and natural selection. In his classic book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn argued that major advances in science are rare, and that true scientific revolutions involve fundamental changes in the way we think. Kuhn, 1962. Once such a revolution takes place, the world is never seen or understood in the same way. When early astronomers and physicists demonstrated that Earth was not at the center of the universe, what Kuhn described as a paradigm shift occurred. A similar paradigm shift occurred in biology when Charles Darwin laid out his theory of evolution by natural selection. In On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, Darwin presented two revolutionary ideas. Each had been suggested independently by others before, but never had they been brought together with the conceptual brilliance and the naturalist's eye of Charles Darwin. Chapter 2. After decades of observations, collecting data from near and far, reading incessantly, and synthesizing and resynthesizing theories from a number of different disciplines, Darwin recognized that the wide diversity of life we see around us has descended from previously existing species, which share a common ancestor from further back in time. Second, Darwin realized that the often exquisite fit of species to their environments is primarily a result of natural selection, a gradual process in which forms that are better suited to their environment increase in frequency in a population over sufficiently long periods of time. As we will see throughout this book, sufficiently long can range from a matter of days to tens of thousands of years, depending on the strength of natural selection and the rate of reproduction of the organisms we are studying. Together, these two ideas proposed by Darwin suggest that the entire organic world, much of everything we see, feel, smell, taste, and touch, is the result of evolutionary changes that have taken place over time. Once the theory of evolution by natural selection was developed, scientists had at their disposal a natural as opposed to a supernatural explanation for the diversity of life on the planet, as well as an explanation for why the vast majority of life forms that have ever existed are now extinct. More than that, they had a theory that could be used to explain the similarities and differences among all the creatures on Earth, both past and present. Paradigm shifts have wide-ranging effects, and that was certainly the case for Darwin's theory, so much so that the renowned geneticist Theodosius Dobzhansky wrote, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Dobzhansky, 1973, p. 125. Without evolutionary theory, biology is composed of a large number of very important, but disparate, subdisciplines. With evolution as its theoretical and conceptual foundation, however, biological science shares a common framework that allows us to understand both the commonalities and differences among living forms. It allows us to make sense of the way that living things function now and to understand how they came to be. The study of physics is fundamental to understanding our universe, because it allows us to reconstruct the grand story of how the universe came to be as it is, and it lets us understand how the universe operates today. The study of evolution is similarly fundamental in that it allows us to reconstruct the grand story of how all living things came to be, and how they, and we, function. As you will see as you work your way through this book, the characteristics of the organisms you are studying have been shaped by the evolutionary process. Whether you are interested in anatomy, physiology, behavior, molecular biology, genetics, development, or any other area of biology, a solid understanding of evolution is indispensable. In this chapter, we will, provide a brief introduction to evolution and natural selection, including examples related to 1. Artificial selection, 2. Antibiotic resistance, 3. Conservation biology, 4. Molecular genetics and evolution in primates, and 5. Sperm competition in fowl. A sense-given overview of empirical and theoretical approaches to the study of evolution. A sense discuss a more detailed example of the way that empirical and theoretical approaches interact by looking at the evolution of sex ratios. 1.1. A brief introduction to evolution and natural selection. The science of evolutionary biology reads like a great detective story in the sense that it unravels a great mystery. Indeed, evolutionary biologists are detectives as are all scientists, but they are much more than that. The discipline of evolutionary biology allows us not only to infer the relationships among all life that has ever lived, and to track the diversity of life across vast stretches of time, but also to test hypotheses through a rigorous combination of observation and experimental manipulations. These observations and experiments may involve examining fossils or living organisms. They may use, among other things, anatomical, molecular genetic, developmental, and behavioral data. They may involve analyzing data from DNA sequences to population composition. Figure 1.1. At its core, evolutionary biology is the study of the origin, maintenance, and diversity of life on Earth over approximately the last 3.5 billion years. To fully understand the evolution of a species, we need to know the ancestral species from which it descended, and we need to know what sort of modifications have occurred along the way. Darwin referred to this entire process as descent with modification. If the species in question is Homo sapiens, for example, we need to understand the primate species from which it descended, as well as other species closely related to this ancestral species, and the changes that occurred over the period in which H. sapiens evolved. We use the same reasoning if the species in question is the malaria parasite, Plasmodium falciparum, or corn, Z. maize. That is, we try to discern the ancestral history of the species in question, and at the same time, we attempt to track the modifications that have occurred in that species. Again, we aim to understand the process of descent with modification. One of the most important processes responsible for the modifications that occur over time is natural selection. We will discuss natural selection and other evolutionary processes in greater detail in coming chapters. For the time being, we can summarize natural selection as follows. Genetic mutations, or changes to the DNA sequence, arise continually and change the phenotype, the observable, measurable characteristics of organisms. These mutations can increase fitness, decrease fitness, or have no effect on fitness, where fitness is measured in terms of relative survival rates and reproductive success. Many mutations will disrupt processes that are already fine-tuned, and thus they will have harmful effects on fitness. By analogy, consider tinkering with a telephone. If you randomly change one part of a phone, chances are that you will have a phone that doesn't work, or, at the very least, doesn't work as well as it did before you started tinkering with it. But, by chance, some mutations will turn out to be advantageous in the sense that the individuals who carry them may have more surviving offspring than average. Such genetic changes that improve the fitness of individuals will tend to increase in frequency over time. The result is evolutionary change by natural selection. The accumulation of advantageous genetic changes, amassed over long periods of time, can produce dramatic effects within a population, even to the extent of producing new species, genera, families, and higher taxonomic orders. Indeed, as we will see many times throughout the course of this book, the process of natural selection is fundamental in what are called the major transitions that have taken place over the last 3.5 billion years of life on Earth: the evolution of the prokaryotic cell, the evolution of the eukaryotic cell, the evolution of multicellularity, and so on. Repeatedly throughout this book, we will examine the power of natural selection in shaping the life that we see around us. We begin with some of the practical applications of understanding evolution via natural selection. The examples in this section, as well as all the examples we discuss in this chapter, are meant to illustrate some of the major concepts, methods, and tools that biologists use to understand evolution. Page 6.